I know I'm a little bit late to the party on this one, but I've been meaning to talk about this for months. Back in the July 2025 update, the Ministry of Balance article, which preceded that update, announced a buff to the legendary tier French cruiser Henri IV. And I don't think I've talked about the buff on YouTube since it occurred, thus being a little bit late to the party. Now, before we get into the nature of the buff, I'm going to show you my commander build. It's this weeb woman who was, I believe, a BA commander. You absolutely don't need her to achieve Henri's newly buffed DPM. You could certainly use a free-to-play commander. Her main gimmick is to increase the number of main battery reload boosters that you get from 3 to 4. And while the main battery reload booster is active, it improves your dispersion by an absurd amount. I think something like 20%. Her inspirations are Mikawa and Mimbelli. Mimbelli gives you a little bit extra reload. He buffs the reload time by 5.23% at the level I have him. And then in the fourth row of modules, we have the reload module, or I think it's called Main Battery Mod 3. It improves the reload time by 10%, but we spent 500 steel to improve it to the Epic version. And on the Epic version, of course, it reduces the reload even further by an additional 2% for every 30,000 damage you do, topping out at a total of 10%. You can proc it, I think, 5 times, which means ultimately you get a 20% reload buff from that module when it's fully maxed. That sounds gigantic. Is that even right? I think it is. In any case, the reload time being buffed in the July update, it went from 13 seconds base to 10.5. With the reload mod completely unprocced, and with Mimbelli as one inspiration, we're enjoying a 7.9 second reload, which gets better as the battle goes on. You can see we're up to 22,000 damage at the moment with the fire still burning. If that brings us to 30k, well then all of a sudden our reload is going to be improved. And of course, you don't have to use the Epic module. I realize people like to hold on to steel so that they can buy some of the steel ships. But if you're like me, and you're not too concerned about the steel ships, then the epic mods or even the legendary mods are perhaps not the worst way to spend steel, especially on a ship like this, which I think benefits from it. But in any case, a 7.9 second reload. How does that compare to the predecessors on this line, those being the Charles Martel and the San Louis? Well, both of them only have 203mm guns. On Henri IV, we've got 240, so that's quite a bit bigger. But of course, San Louis, not Azur San Louis, I don't think we have a version of that yet, do we? Well, in any case, San Louis is the most cracked of the French heavy cruisers. And by heavy cruisers, I do mean this line, the Charles Martel, San Louis, Henri. I realize there's also the Cherbourg and the Brest or whatever. But you could call those heavy cruisers. Those have almost battleship caliber guns. These are heavy cruisers in the conventional sense. And remember always, the heavy designation refers to the size of the guns rather than the armor. I think a lot of people get that a little bit confused. Although the Henri does have perhaps better armor than your typical heavy cruiser of this nature. Certainly better than the San Louis and the Charles Martel in the sense that we've got 30mm plating on the deck and the upper belt armor. That can protect us from things with 16-inch guns. We can angle against them. But with the proliferation of 457mm guns, it maybe isn't as valuable as it would have been before things like, for example, USS Ohio or Lauria or Vermont or Preußen existed. All of those can overmatch the armor pretty much everywhere. So the only way to really protect yourself is by doing what we just did there against the Ohio. Got to be very frustrating. He's probably raging about his shells falling short. Oh no. Well, he aimed and we went forward a little bit from where he was aiming because of the Henri's acceleration, and so the shells fell into the water. And in that way, you can protect yourself by, throttle juking and the like. However, the Henri is not the most maneuverable cruiser in the world, and that's where the downside really comes in. We've got an 11.2 second rudder shift on this build. Suppose we could buff that by not using the propulsion mod in whatever mod slot that is, but we are doing that because the acceleration on this thing is good, and sometimes it's enough to throw off salvos, like the one you just saw from the Ohio. So it's a bit of a catch-22, and in some ways, you're a less maneuverable brick than the Charles Martel or San Luis. By the way, we get the Witherer there. That is not the first time I've gotten a Witherer in this ship since the buff. In fact, I played about 2 or 3 other matches before this one, where I also got Witherers. However, this was the most interesting of the 3 or 4 matches with Witherers that I played. The rest of them were sort of like this. You can see we're just sort of playing between the Alpha and the Bravo caps. We haven't moved all that much. We don't need to. Things are pushing into us, so we're able to farm them as they do. And another thing I should say about these guns, as we're continuing to farm USS Ohio, is being 240mm guns, they have better alpha than the 203s on the Charles Martel or San Luis. Both of those, for their HE, do less than 3,000 maximum damage per shell. I want to say it's in the high 2,000 range. Well, Henri, it's over 3,000. I believe 3,400 with a 22% fire chance. And being larger guns, they pen 40 millimeters of armor, whereas the 203s on the predecessors to the ship will pen 33 millimeters of armor. Not a huge difference there. I think only a matter of, 7 millimeters or so? But it's significant in some ways. There are certain ships, like the entire American battleship line, for example, Ohio, Vermont, Montana, not actually sure about Louisiana due to the flight deck, but at least those 3 have 38mm armor plating on the deck and on the upper belts, if I'm not mistaken. There's not too many heavy cruisers that can pen 38mm, so it gives the Americans a little bit of extra tankiness against HE spam, in spite of their relatively large superstructures that can be farmed. But if you hit your shells on their deck with 203mm guns, they'll just shatter, and you'd have to rely on the fire chance. Not with the Henri. They will pen, and they will do good damage. We're up to 169,000 damage right now with the high caliber and Witherer medals. And thankfully, the enemy Shimakaze, who was left alive after our destroyer was dispatched earlier, gets caught in somebody's radar, I guess. He's spotted inside of his smoke screen, kind of stationary, trying to reverse. The damage from Henri when these shells hit, especially with the gimmick from the commander on the improved dispersion for the main battery reload booster, well, it's pretty lethal. And there we get 2 fists right in a row on, I think, the Ohio and the Shimakaze. Why isn't there some sort of double fist medal, like the double strike? Wargaming, where is that? Add that to the game. We're going to need it. But we're up to 3 fists now. This game has been a blowout, like pretty much every match I've played this entire week. Try not to show these things on YouTube, but when you're trying to demonstrate the improved DPM of a ship, well, I felt like this was a good example. In any case, it's down to just the Worcester, who is doing the American cruiser thing of hiding behind that island over there. I don't know how he's spotting anybody to shoot at, but apparently he is. And then we've got another cruiser and a battleship on the complete other side of the map, so we're just going to drive straight into this Worcester and try to sink him. I think a lot of people prior to this buff on the Henri thought it wasn't a very good ship, and I can understand why. Like I said, it is a little bit of a brick in terms of its maneuverability. Certainly the Charles Martel and San Luis are both more agile. And while the armor on this thing is improved, it doesn't so much matter. If you're facing a lot of 457mm guns, it'd be the same thing as the Charles Martel or the San Luis facing 16-inch guns. You can't really angle to them. So there's all of that. And then with the slower reload, the larger guns, people just seem to feel like the ship was a little bit mediocre. And that might have been the case. I liked it prior to this buff, but now that we've got better reload and therefore better DPM, if you were one of the people who thought Henri was kind of mediocre, maybe try it again now, because this improved reload, it really does help. And I don't think you necessarily need the Epic Reload mod to get the most out of it, but personally, I really loved the French cruisers, so I've got the Epic Reload mod on all 3. Charles Martel, San Luis, this thing. Feel like it is a good thing to have. And, well, the torpedoes are nice too, but we're not going to get any hits here against this Worcester. Trying to use the AP against his broadside, but we don't have any improved pen angles, and, he's straightening up now, so HE through the bow. Doesn't matter. Somebody else gets the kill on him. We've got 4 fists now. All that's left is the battleship and the cruiser, so we'll just cut to the end of the battle so we don't have to watch us sailing across the map to find this border patrolling Zhao here. Pretty good tactics, I would say, to make sure no ships are getting through that border. We should all thank him for his service, I guess, but we're not going to get the kill here. We are going to get some damage, and so we get the discount Kraken because of that. The Helping Hand medal for 5 fists. Nice to have, makes you feel like a good teammate, I suppose. And we win this battle with 190,000 damage done. Not quite top of the leaderboard because the Preußen is a psychotic ship, but, pretty good results from the Henri and pretty consistent results. Again, this is not the only battle I've had where I've gotten a Witherer. This is probably the 3rd this week. So this thing, Prince Witherers, it's a good ship. I enjoy it. Hope you enjoyed the video. If so, give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.